Good afternoon and welcome to Axia Public Relations Crisis PR Manage Your Business in a Crisis webinar. I'm your host, Jason Mudd of Axia Public Relations, and I want to thank you for joining us today. Let's go ahead and get started right away. I trust everyone can see the screen. If you can't, or if you have questions throughout the webinar, don't hesitate to use the GoToWebinar control panel to submit your questions through the questions box. We will be monitoring for your questions throughout the entire webinar, and we encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. I'm going to give you just a moment just to confirm that you're not having any technical difficulties or any needs during the presentation. So today we're going to talk about crisis PR and managing your company in a crisis. I don't know if you've seen recent headlines, but we just blogged recently about Target really having a tough time from their data breach last year to starting off this year, making many impromptu cuts. And to be honest, I'm concerned that their CEO may not be able to survive this ongoing business challenges that they're facing. I've also thought for years now that, as Target has said publicly, they are trying to capture more market share from Walmart, and Walmart is trying to capture market share from Target. I feel like that's a bad move for both companies because ultimately what they're doing is devaluing their niche and alienating customers. So it's ironic to me that Target wants to be more like Walmart and growing their sales and growing the number of people who frequent their stores, and yet Walmart wants to be like Target and trying to make their stores a little bit more upscale, a little less crowded. And what happens is ultimately it's not very good for business when companies try to tread into each other's unique space and they lose their own identity. So first of all, a quick disclaimer, we are recording this webinar for promotional purposes. We at Axia own all copyrights to it, and of course we are not attorneys, so we are not providing legal guidance to you today, nor your corporation. We recommend that you involve legal counsel for any matters related to risk, liability, and crisis. The following are recommendations based on our public relations expertise, and I hope you'll find them very beneficial. So why are we here? Today, we are here to prepare your business and PR executives, as well as your overall executive team, for crisis communications and crisis PR management. This is a photo, obviously, of a chemical spill, one that most of the people on this call hope to never have to experience in their career or at their location. But using the tips that I'm going to share with you today, you will find yourself much more enabled and equipped to be able to respond to any crisis like this when and if it should ever happen. And to be honest, it's more of a when it happens kind of scenario, because crisis can hit any company at any time, whether you're a big company or a small company, whether you're Target or this chemical plant, whether you provide B2B services or you're a B2C company delivering services and products to consumers. And we're going to give real life examples of that throughout this webinar. I'm excited you're here. I hope you're excited too. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to jump into our questions panel on your GoToWebinar control panel. Submit them and we will answer them live or in near real time. In addition, if you have follow-up questions during the webinar or after the webinar, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And I also want to encourage you to take a moment and sign up for our additional webinars that we have at axiapr.com/webinar. That's axiapr.com/webinar. And when you go there, you'll be able to, on the left-hand side, you'll be able to sign up for our webinar notifications. And on the right-hand side, you'll be able to sign up for specific webinars. So I would take a moment and do both. We have another webinar coming up next month on spokesperson training. And that's really a natural progression from talking about crisis management. And you'll see what I mean as we go through this webinar today. Lastly, I encourage you to follow us on Twitter at axiapr.com. We're also on Facebook at the Axia Public Relations Firm. So let's talk about crisis. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Play-Doh Sweet Shop Cake Mountain, but there have been an outcry from consumers, basically parents, mothers, saying that they feel like a part of this Play-Doh set resembles a phallic symbol, and they have been very upset, and Hasbro has had a little bit of Play-Doh or egg on their face over it. And whether that was a malicious intent or just a true accident, this has generated a lot of negative PR, a lot of negative press and media coverage for Hasbro, and they have really been under the gun to respond timely to this and professionally. And I believe that they have recalled the product, or at least revised the product, and are sending replacement tools to go with it, based on the parents who were very upset by it. And then there's America's Dad, Bill Cosby, who is making headlines again for sexual assault or sexual harassment of women, and really just taking advantage of them. And as you've probably seen, a lot of people feel like he's not handled this very well. We've blogged about this on our blog at axiapr.com/blog, and I encourage you to take a look at some of our thoughts there. But Mr. Cosby, once beloved by the American public, is now very much going through a difficult crisis situation for his own brand and reputation. And so are the venues he's presenting at, and the corporate sponsors, and the entourage that he travels with, and the people and companies that he's involved in have all had their own challenges, dealing with this and addressing this. And whether the accusations are true or false, and they sure seem like they're true based on evidence that's been presented and claims that have been made, Mr. Cosby has a lot of work to do to rebuild his brand and reputation among consumers. And we're going to even give you on this webinar 10 tips to managing a crisis. And I think Mr. Cosby would benefit through going through those tips and experiencing that on his own. And then Ferguson, Missouri, certainly never expected that they would be the center of media attention for rioting and for racial tensions and the justice system and anything else. But, this is a photo from Ferguson, Missouri, which has really just become, a really bad situation, both with civil rights and race relations, as well as police, the police situation there. And I would just say, in general, so much harm has been done to that community, both from a perception and branding and reputation standpoint, but also just to the community in general, with businesses being forced to close, torn down, and many major retailers who are employers in that market completely exiting the market and probably never to return again. And then the NFL has dealt with its own domestic violence and domestic abuse issues, and how it's been handled by Roger Goodell has really put Roger in a difficult spot. And while it looks like he's going to survive that okay, certainly there are many people calling for his head, and many people very, very upset about his mismanagement of these circumstances, and what exactly he knew ahead of time or did not know, and what his people knew, and if they were trying to cover things up. So the NFL has definitely had a lot of pie on its face in the last 6 months or so. And again, the tips we're going to go through today will be helpful to whether you're Ferguson, Missouri, Bill Cosby, the NFL, Target, etc. And then Sony. We all know Sony has been under a lot of heat lately, from their data breach to rolling out movies that have created threats of terrorism and more hacking, and their emails have revealed some confidential information and information that they probably would not have wanted in the public domain. And I think the lesson learned from this for everybody is the old cliche, never put in writing or say out loud what you don't want published or known by other people. And in this case, I think Sony really did themselves a disservice by, allowing confidential and highly opinionated information to be available through their email. So on this webinar, we are going to talk about sample crisis, similar to what we've done already. We're going to talk about Axia's unique apology model, Axia's 10 steps to managing a crisis, and then some sample crisis statements you can use as well in your own corporation. So let's get started right away. I know you're excited to go through these, as are we excited to present them to you. So we put together some sample crisis that we've managed recently or over the years in our 12-year history providing public relations counsel and services to corporate clients. And this one slide, believe it or not, is all the crisis we've dealt with for one client. And that one client had all of these things happen to them within a 12-month period. So this is a great company, one that we are very pleased to have represented for nearly a decade now. However, most of the time, we never have to do crisis work for them. In fact, I'm pretty sure for the first 3 to 5 years of the relationship, we never had one crisis issue that we ever had to address with them, for them, or on their behalf. And then all of a sudden, unexpectedly, we had several crisis matters come up that we needed to address in a short period of time, and literally like within one calendar year. And as I'm looking at this list, I can even think of another crisis that occurred, and something probably most PR people and most business executives never think of. And that would be, at one time, they had a really bad storm come through the city that they're headquartered in, and literally one of the letters on the skyline, or on one of the letters on the skyscraper that their company is headquartered on, one of the letters from their logo, one of the letters from their company name actually fell off from wind damage and fell from the top of the building all the way down into the street and actually landed on the sidewalk. And as far as we know, no one was injured, and the building facilities manager or maintenance personnel on the scene at the time was smart enough to go down and pick it up and recover it and get it out of the way so no one saw it. But certainly those letters can be several feet tall, perhaps, even 30, 50 or more feet tall. And one of those letters, even though they're plastic, falling down from so many thousands of feet and landing on the sidewalk could be extremely dangerous to any bystander, and certainly creates a liability for the building and perhaps a black eye for that company. So getting back to this list, we had a CEO of the company with a past who was shot in the wrong neighborhood over holiday weekend. It was really just a robbery, but the location that the robbery occurred in was questionable, and many wondered why a CEO of a large corporation, what he would be doing in that kind of neighborhood at that kind of hour of the day. We had an employee of that company who came to work armed with a handgun and was shooting at work at his coworkers, and made a really dangerous situation at one of their branch locations. We had another employee who was terminated and created a murder-suicide at his home involving his children. And that was obviously a major issue and something we had to carefully navigate on behalf of our client. And then we had a former employee arrested by the FBI for fraud, and as part of that process, they seized a branch office of my client so that they could get whatever records and materials they need. They were also under the impression that that employee was still working there. And so when they came to the office, they were looking for that employee. Next, they had a situation where management as well as employees were stealing data from a competitor through an elaborate scheme that they had developed to try and steal away clients. And obviously that was a big deal and turned into a lawsuit and potentially criminal charges. And then the same company, or at least a division of it, was acquired by a foreign group. And then we were dealing with the CEO receiving death threats at the front desk of their corporate headquarters, or at least someone who was hostile towards the CEO who was planning on attacking, harming, and perhaps even attempting to murder the CEO. So these things happen. They happen more often than a lot of people think. In fact, in my career, I've come to realize that high-profile companies and CEOs, public or private, mostly public, the CEO receiving death threats is not at all unusual or unique. In fact, it's something that you need to be wise enough to consider before you accept high-profile positions, and something you need to consider and prepare for from a security standpoint as well. We've helped clients deal with their China warehouse stoppage. What that means is basically they were under a contract with a manufacturer in China who has just suddenly decided they weren't getting paid well enough, and they have ceased to manufacture the product when the company is in its highest demand season for its product, and very shrewd tactics, and the company needed to figure out a way to get around that PR crisis. A tsunami will hit factories, plants, and offices. Products can't be delivered, products recalled, revised earnings when the economy went bad. A lot of companies spent several quarters having to revise their earnings forecast, or some companies cooked the books and lied on their financial reporting and had to go back and revise them. Customer data breach, which seems like every week we're hearing about a new company having to deal with that, whether it's Target, Home Depot, or otherwise. We once had a client whose marketing plan appeared on Google because a former employee thought that the marketing plan was something that they, believe it or not, they once proofread, and they thought it was part of their portfolio and wanted to put it on their online portfolio, which of course the bad news is that the 3-year marketing plan was available for anyone to see, including competitors, providers, and other folks who could quickly go in and see what they're spending and where, and what they're planning to announce and when and where, and how they plan to evolve their product offering. And so we were personally, as a firm, involved in helping to get Google to delist it and get it removed from the server it was hosted on. We've dealt with situations where a client's merger began appearing in the news prematurely. And then one of our specialties, and we've done a webinar on this entire topic, is what do you do when your Google results are unfavorable to your company's brand and reputation? How do you fix that? How do you clean that up? In a crisis, there are 3 things I want you to be thinking about. Number 1, I want you to be humane. Number 2, state only what you know. And number 3, what you'll do next. Now, the truth is, you have to decide now how you're going to handle a crisis when it happens. And not if it happens, but when it happens, because crisis will hit any company at any time. And our research shows that for every $1 you spend on crisis planning, you'll save $7 during an actual crisis. So that's a very wise investment of your time and resources to plan now for a crisis and when it happens. The other thing our research shows is that 40% of companies never recover from a crisis. So 40% of companies will go out of business because of a crisis occurring in their corporation. So the 3 steps are: be humane, state only what you know, and 3, what you'll do next. Now, what I mean by that is be humane, meaning that in a crisis, you have to think of the people who are impacted. You're going to be under a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. You're going to be very frustrated. You're probably going to be, quite frankly, just overwhelmed and perhaps even tired. And maybe you've been up for hours or dealing with this issue for weeks and you're just exhausted and completely stressed out. But you have to remember to stay reasonable, be humane, and realize that there are other people in addition to yourself impacted by this crisis. The other thing is state only what you know. Don't try to speculate. Don't make things up. Don't go on conjecture. Use the facts you have. And if you don't have the facts, tell people you don't have the facts. And that leads us to the third thing, what you'll do next. Not only what you'll do next, meaning, when you'll have the facts and when you'll get back to them with more information, but what are you going to do next to fix the situation? And we're going to go into more detail about that in just a moment. In a crisis, I also want you to be thinking about how you're going to respond. And so another way to look at this is, I apologize. I can't tell you. Here's why I can't tell you, and here's what I can say. And that goes back to my comment earlier about when you're not sure what to say, just say, I apologize. I can't tell you that information. And then the here's why part, because I don't know it yet, and we don't want to give false information. So we are waiting to get the information, or we are working to get the information, or we're preparing the information that you need to have a better understanding of what's going on. But that said, here's what I can say, and then you go into the details of what you know to be absolute fact, even if it's very limited information. And then there's the 3 T's of crisis PR, and I really like these. The first one is tell the truth, tell it all, and tell it fast. This is pretty obvious. The first thing you want to do is tell the truth. Never try to lie. As a general business policy, never lie. It always catches up with you. It's always miserable when people find out. But most importantly, during a crisis, don't try to tell a lie, because you're going to lose all credibility and eventually the truth will come out. So you may as well tell the truth up front. And then the second thing is tell it all. And that means just be detailed. Tell them exactly what happened, a detailed truth. But you have to keep in mind, again, you need to check with your attorney for any legal liabilities that might exist. And then third, tell it fast. Don't spend time trying to create the right message. Don't spend time trying to spin it the right way. Of course, you want to come up with thoughtful key messages and positioning, but you can't spend forever on it. You got to get the information out there fast and be diligent in your communication efforts. And then we have what we call the AXI apology model. And it's basically, when you need to apologize, this is the right way to apologize. Confess, apologize, rectify, prevent/reformation, and seek forgiveness. And this is a really good model, something we came up with years ago. We really came up with it proactively, which is the best way to do things. We were planning on knowing or recognizing that eventually our clients are going to have some issues, and ones that warrant an apology to the public or to internal audiences like shareholders and employees, vendors, etc. And so we really felt like this was a really good model. Confess, apologize, rectify, prevention, reformation, and seek forgiveness. And we're going to use this as an example. So confess. State what you did, own up to it, be clear and candid, give enough details, okay? So again, if you're going to confess, this is what happened, okay? This is what we did. We did it, we're ashamed of it, or we shouldn't have done it. We violated our code of ethics. We violated our industry policies or our company policies. Be clear and candid. What exactly did you do? And then give enough detail to satisfy the audience. You don't want to overwhelm them with details, but you do want to be genuine, and you do want to make sure you're thorough in your explanation. Here's an example statement. In 2011, we discovered our product posed a potential safety threat to our customers. We did not resolve this situation, and out of fear of product delays, manufacturing costs, and reduced profits, we continued to make tools with lead contamination. Okay? And then you want to apologize. Say apologize, not just sorry for whatever it is you did. I apologize to our customers and our communities that I did not provide the right leadership and the sense of courage and integrity to protect you and instill your trust. It's a very detailed yet genuine apology, arguably even heartfelt. And then rectify. How will you make the current situation better? What are the short-term reactive measures? Okay. And so we will provide complimentary lead testing centers as well as a refund or replace all toys known to or tools, per the previous example, known to contain unsafe lead levels. We will pay all fines and create a lead safety board among all toy manufacturers. We will also return a portion of our proceeds over the next 24 months to children's hospitals involved in researching and treating lead poisoning. Lead poison. I personally think that's an excellent way to rectify the situation. Uh, there's a case book or case study that is the textbook example of crisis management, and it is from Tylenol's contamination recall from many years ago. And we blog about that also at axiapr.com/blog. And I would encourage you to check that out as well. It's an excellent example of just the best and leading expertise in crisis management and crisis PR responsiveness, and probably will be celebrated for many more decades to come. Okay, so Axia's apology model, prevention, reformation. What are the long-term preemptive steps that will ensure this doesn't happen again, ever again? Okay, and that was, this will not happen again, as we are pledging to operate lead-free and will now have an officer charged with quality assurance and oversight of our compliance to the Lead Safety Manufacturing Board. So basically, you're making a commitment saying we're going to create a high-level position who this person and their team will be charged with quality assurance and oversight of our complete compliance. And then also, like I said, you want to seek forgiveness. This is important. Don't forget to ask for forgiveness from whomever it is that you have impacted, whether it's your employees, shareholders, customers, community, and other stakeholders, and just those overall impacted. We hope that you will forgive our organization for my mistake. And that's in the case of this executive, which is actually with FIFA, saying, we hope that you will forgive our organization for my mistake. And that's really taking the ownership in the situation. I think that will really build up trust with the community. I'm sorry, this is FIFA. So crisis statements. What went wrong? How does it affect me? How will it be fixed? What will be done to ensure it doesn't happen again? Okay, these are all questions you need to ask yourself as you're preparing your own crisis statements. Okay, communicate that your organization has responsible protocols in place to lessen the impact of a crisis. Okay, now if that's not true, obviously you won't communicate that. But if you do your crisis planning, as we're going to discuss here in just a moment, ahead of time, you will be prepared for a crisis, hence the point of this entire webinar. So here we go. Here are the 10 steps to gain the advantage during a crisis, okay? And the truth is, it all comes down to being prepared ahead of time, okay? The first step in crisis planning is to identify your crisis communications team. Identify spokespersons, and then train those spokespersons. And like I said, in our next webinar, we're going to be talking about spokesperson training, and that's in February 2014. So I hope you'll sign up for it at axiapr.com/webinars. There's both, you sign up for it on the right side of the page, and then on the left side of the page, you can sign up to receive notifications of our future webinars. And I encourage you to take a moment to do that now so that you're in tune with us in the future. So next month, we're going to talk about spokesperson training, but I can tell you a lot of times executives don't think they need to be spokesperson trained. They think they're a good speaker. They think they've had experiences with the media. But I can tell you there are 3 reasons why companies don't hire PR firms or don't want to hire a PR firm. And one of those, in my experience, the second most popular reason is they've had a negative experience either with the media or with being quoted in the media, or maybe even dealing with a crisis. So my point in sharing this with you is to encourage you that spokesperson training is very important, very valuable. In fact, we even have a blog coming out soon that talks just about that, and even more specifically shares that most CEOs do want to be spokesperson trained, and they do believe that it is good for their executive team to be spokesperson trained. And we have spokesperson training workshops that we can produce on a custom basis for your company. Occasionally, we will also have spokesperson training events that are open to the public, but we prefer to do them more privately so we can customize them specific to the company and the industry and the individuals in the room. And for more information about that, you can visit our website. The fourth step is to establish communication protocols. What does that mean? What is the process of how you're going to communicate? What channels are you going to use? Who are the authorized spokespersons? How does someone report a crisis if they see one? So, for example, the facility maintenance man that I mentioned earlier, who saw a part of the company's name or logo in the street and in the sidewalk, of course, like I mentioned, he picked it up, got it out of sight and got it out of harm's way and not causing any danger to anybody. But then he had a protocol to follow of who to let know that something has happened. And that's important because you want to have people in the know in your company who, when they see something happen, they know who to alert versus not knowing what to do and maybe not taking action, not completing an incident report and have something blow up. But also the channels that you're going to communicate through and who is authorized to use those channels, whether it be news media, social media, employee newsletter, email blast, Twitter accounts, etc. Even over the PA system, if there is a crisis, do you use a PA system? Do you sound an alarm? Do you use your ability to broadcast across all the phones within your company or within your office space or your factory? And then 5, identify, know your audience. And this is important. Is your audience, depending on the type of crisis, who could it be? And the best thing to do is to have mock crisis. So come up with a mock crisis, ideally one that you think will happen in the near term or is likely to happen at your location. And write your PR plan to make sure, your crisis plan to make sure it adopts and addresses those issues. But who will be the audience for that particular crisis? Is it employees? Is it Is it employees? Is it shareholders? Is it customers? Is it clients? Is it regulatory boards? Is it your neighboring, the citizens that are within a certain mile radius of your factory, of your sand mine? Is it the people who are in dwellings, apartments, or condos nearby, your corporate office or your skyscraper? Or is it other businesses in the neighboring buildings, or is it other tenants within your building? Is it government officials you need to involve? Is it investors? Is it vendors? And of course, don't overlook the media. The media is both a tool and an audience 9 times out of 10, because you're going to want to communicate to the media so that they can use their channel to communicate to a broader audience. And then you need to anticipate crisis, as I mentioned. Brainstorm, have a session with your, as mentioned, number 1, your crisis communication team. Together and collectively, be thinking through these issues and be preparing for a mock trial or mock crisis, and come up with, here are 10 crises that we could see happening, very likely happening. And then from there, use those 10 examples to make sure to poke holes in your crisis plan. But more importantly, continue to brainstorm of other ideas and other circumstances and situations. And then step 7 is assess the situation. And what that means is when you have a crisis, okay, be level-headed about it and assess what's really going on. Don't use emotions to make your decisions, okay? Really be very pragmatic about the circumstances and what's going on. Some crises are major, some are minor, and each one will have a different and unique approach in response to how you handle it. Step 8 is identify key messages. And that's important as well as part of your plan. And you should have, in my opinion, key messages for each crisis situation, and dive deeper and have key messages for each crisis situation and for each of your target audience. So in other words, the messages you communicate to your employees internally might be a lot different than the messages you communicate to your external audiences like media and customers and neighbors. And it doesn't mean you per se change your message. What it really means to me is that you customize your message, because their stake in your crisis and in your company is very different. What do I mean by that? Your neighbors don't care about how it's going to impact your revenue or your profit or your quarterly numbers or your ability to produce more product. They care about, how is this crisis going to impact me, my home, my safety, my children, my my property value, right? They're not going to be interested in hearing how you anticipate your quarterly numbers looking and whether or not bonuses are still going to be paid out and whether or not products still going to be manufactured. But you better believe that's an important message to Wall Street if you're publicly traded, or to your shareholders if you're privately held, or to your employees and your leadership team if they're counting on, making sure, hey, are we still going to get paid? So each audience has a different demand or requirement upon it, is my point there. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send in your questions through the GoToWebinar control panel. We are monitoring for questions there and happy to answer any that you might have. But I just want to take a moment to remind you to ask questions if you have them. And then lastly, going on, after developing your key messages, decide on the communication methods. And I mentioned that earlier as part of your communication protocols. How are you going to communicate in a crisis? I've seen enterprise level clients have a toll-free employee-only phone number that employees know they can call from anywhere, anytime in the world. And that message will communicate what the employees need to know. For example, for this particular company, they would put weather and other related information where they would say, we are expecting inclement weather in the following cities or the following states. And if you are an employee of those markets, here are here is how you should consider reporting to work. And it would say, non-essential employees are not expected to show to work today, stay home and be safe, where essential employees are expected to either be checking your email or be coming into the office. So it gives clear direction of what to do. And I highly recommend that system. Now, many companies have moved to a private Twitter account or an intranet. And I would encourage you to have multiple ways for people to reach you. And one of the smartest things I've seen people do is put it on the back of their employee badges. So the number is there and readily available for people to call, or the Twitter address, or the intranet address. And so, of course, you can also do media advisories, news releases. You can do email blasts. You can post on the intranet. You can do text messaging, which is very popular now. You can also have that hotline phone number created with a recording that's updated regularly. And if you call the recording and there's no issues, it'll say there are currently no issues or emergencies that impact the employment of our employees or their work schedules. And then lastly, number 10, and I think this might be the most important one, is ride out the storm. And what that means is sometimes you just got to let it ride. You got to let the crisis happen and let it come to a fruition and finale. You cannot continue to, add fuel to the fire. And so sometimes step 10 is saying, we're not going to take any action with this crisis. We're just going to let it happen. And sometimes that can backfire. But then I've seen the other extreme, which is you do too much and you continue to create a media storm or adding fuel to the fire instead of letting something just fade away. The best example that comes top of mind for me about this is several years ago when Tiger Woods was dealing with his own domestic dispute issues, is he disappeared from the public eye and refused to do any media interviews. And then just as soon as the story began to die off and fade away and people would lose interest in it, within a day or two, he would literally come back out and make a new statement. And the new statement would be very limited or not very substantial. It might be very brief. It might cause more questions than it would answers. It might cause more confusion than it did clarification. And ultimately, he did this 3 or 4 times, and every time it created a new ripple effect, a new media storm, more interest, more questions, more concerns. basically more negative exposure. And my advice to Tiger Woods at the time would have been to back off, dude, and just ride the storm out. I'm not sure who was his advisors at that time, but sports radio was all over it, and so was the sports media and the national news media. Lastly, as we wrap up, I want to encourage you to download our free ebook, Managing Crisis, our Public Relations in a Crisis. It's very popular. It has been our most popular download ever this month, among any months in the past. It was also our top download for 2014, and already very much so leading the way for our top download in 2015. So if you go to our website, axiapr.com, you can click on resources at the top menu, or you can go directly there at axiapr.com/resources-ebooks. I'm going to stay on the line a little bit longer if anybody has any questions, but this completes our webinar for today. Do sign up for our next webinar at axiapr.com/webinars. And again, on the right, you'll see in February, we are offering our webinar on spokesperson training. Sign up for that today on the right-hand side. But on the left-hand side, you can sign up so that you get notification of any and all webinars as we announce them using the form over to the left-hand side of the page. I'm not seeing any questions, so if there aren't any questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you for your time and interest in Axia. Be sure you're following us on Twitter, Facebook, you're subscribed to our blog, you're subscribed to our webinars. We're making a continued effort to stay connected and committed to helping people learn more about the art and profession of public relations, and specifically to help out companies who might be looking to hire a PR firm. We would love to help you with that as well. So I'm Jason Mudd. I'm at JasonMudd9 on Twitter, JasonMudd9 on Twitter. I look forward to hearing from you and you sharing any further follow-up questions you might have, or if we can ever be a PR resource to you, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you for your time today.